Esoteric Development. There exist two prerequisites for occultism. A higher human solitude, defined as living totally within one's soul, and overcoming egotism. The querent must also become deaf and dumb to time, which she prescribes for herself. She must be able to concentrate to the extent that she would be unshaken by a cannon firing next to her. She must be free of all memory impressions, particularly as they relate to everyday life. In spiritual solitude, harmony with the external is never lost. And whoever is motivated by egotism cannot get far. I must get away from the notion of a difference between the other and myself. When the inner self speaks, it is generally the lower self. The higher self exists outside of ourselves. The feeling of veneration is the elevating force, raising us to supersensible life. A new birth. The higher soul is to be born. A person may become a liar when she enters into the spiritual world, for the capacity to distinguish between true and false is easily lost. Thereby, the strictest moral training of personal character is required, parallel to occult training. One who wants to develop toward higher worlds is prone to temptations. Unless she can subdue everything that meets her with the powerful strength of character and highest morality, lust and passions grow as opportunities increase. A person ascending to higher worlds finds previously hidden opportunities for evils lurking about her. In every aspect of her life, a demon awaits her, ready to lead her astray. Thereby, moral training is necessary for white magic. Personal development forms the foundation for occult training. 1. One must develop the ability to distinguish in every situation what is unimportant from what is important, perishable from imperishable. She must develop the habit of seeing and seeking in everything its essence. The occultist must be able to regard a stone with reverence, bereft of concepts and feeling. The stone is pure within itself, with no desires, wishes, or lust. It is complete and satisfied, setting an example for the human. For the occultist to feel this, she has grasped what the stone can tell her. In such a way, the occultist can glean meaning from all things. Qualities of the occultist. She must become master of her thoughts, particularly over the train of her thought, called control of thoughts. When thoughts whirl about, our thoughts govern us totally. We must gain the ability to steep in a particular thought at a certain time of day, and not allow other thoughts to enter and disturb the soul. 2. Control over our actions. It is necessary to undertake actions unmotivated by external matters. 3. Even-temperedness. People fluctuate between joy and sorrow, allowing themselves to be rocked on the waves of life. The occultist must reach equanimity and steadiness. 4. Understanding for every being. Strive at all times to approach what is wonderful in every object of outer reality. This will lead to the ability to tolerate and to an understanding of everything and of every being. 5. Complete openness toward everything new that meets us. One must be willing to withhold one's own judgment and listen to others. One must develop the ability to listen, and this will enable one to meet matters with the greatest possible openness. This is called faith. 6. Inner harmony. Also necessary to develop her feelings for freedom to the highest degree. This feeling will enable her to seek within herself, the center of her own being, stand on her own 2 feet, not needing to consult others to make decisions. These qualities enable her to stand above dangers arising from the division of her nature. Like plant and animal life, the physical body is rhythmic, for it is set in order by higher powers, the wisdom of the world, or Holy Spirit. Fasting is enormously significant for creating rhythm in the astral body. To fast is to restrain desire to eat and block the astral body in relation to this desire. She who fasts blocks the astral body and develops in no desire to eat. This is like blocking a force in a machine. The astral body becomes inactive, and the whole rhythm of the physical body works upward into the astral body to rhythmicize it. Like the imprint of a seal, the harmony of the physical body impresses itself upon the astral body. It would transfer much more permanently if the astral body were not continuously being made irregular by desires, passions, and wishes, including spiritual desires and wishes. The human must make her astral body rhythmical. She must arrange her astral body as the spirit of nature arranges it for the lower realms. In the morning, at a definite time, one must undertake one spiritual action. A different one must be adhered to at another time, again to be performed regularly, and another in the evening. This is one method for taking life in hand and maintaining it there. Set a time in the morning when you can concentrate. One must adhere to this hour. One must establish a kind of calm whereby the occult master in one may awaken. One must meditate about a great thought content that does not pertain to the external world. 15 minutes is sufficient. It is worthless to perform these exercises without regularity. One should make one's astral body a clock. Success will come quickly thus. Human life alternates between 4 stages. 1. Perception of the external world. 2. Imagination or life of mental images, relation to dreams. 3. Dreamless sleep, with no awareness of the ego. 4. Memory is spiritual and remote, distinct from perception. Inner life begins to develop by means of inner contemplation and meditation. Subsequently, dreams attain significance and manifest as spiritual beings. The next step in spiritual life is to comprehend truth by our own qualities and by guiding our dreams consciously. Truth becomes apparent for us when we begin to guide our dreams. First stage is material cognition. The object must lie before us. The next stage, imaginative cognition. This is developed via meditation, by shaping life rhythmically. This is laborious to achieve, but once it has been, there no longer exists a difference between sensible and supersensible in perception. We can experience the spiritual in our usual life when we become deaf and dumb to the sense world, to remember nothing of the everyday world and still retain a spiritual life within us. Then our dream life begins to take on a conscious form. If we are able to pour some of this into our everyday life, then the next capacity arises, rendering the soul qualities of the beings around us perceptible. Then we see not only the external aspect of things, but also the hidden inner essential kernel of things. Third stage, a consciousness which is empty begins to be enlivened by continuity of consciousness. Person then no longer unconscious during sleep. When she would used to sleep, Now she experiences the spiritual world. Usually when a person is asleep, the astral body takes a stroll through the supersensible world, but can't withdraw far from her body. With spiritual science, organs can be developed in the astral body as it wanders during sleep, which allows one to be conscious during sleep. Such organs are developed via meditation. Each member of the physical body is related in a mysterious way to a part of the astral body. When the occultist indicates how one must direct thoughts, feelings, and sensations to this point between the eyebrows, through connecting something formed in the physical body with the corresponding part of the astral body, the result is a certain sensation in the astral body. This must be practiced regularly, and one must know how to do it. Then the astral body begins to form its members from a lump. It grows into an organism, in which organs are formed. They are also called lotus flowers. By means of special word sequences, these lotus flowers are cultivated. Once this has occurred, the human can perceive the spiritual world. This is the same world she enters when passing through the portal of death. There is nothing in our world that is not dependent on the spiritual world. At every moment, everything external is an expression of the spiritual world. For the person looking into the spiritual world, the material world is spiritualized. In truth, there exists no inner knowledge, no self-examination. There is only one knowledge, one revelation of the life around us, through the organs of the physical as well as the spiritual. The human being is called to live in community, and she who secludes herself cannot arrive at a spiritual life. It is important for the occultist to consider other humans as true manifestations of her higher self, because she knows then she must find the others in herself. Anthroposophy conceives that knowledge is fluid, capable of evolution. The human may access another mind, but it is not the subconscious. Within this mind, the human possesses complete logical watchfulness over herself. The spiritual researcher seeks mental contents, but lets them exist in her mind as operative forces, concepts, not cognitional elements, but real forces. The mind can withdraw into a region of the inner being. The spiritual researcher renders herself capable of completely eliminating the content of symbols from her consciousness. What she then still has to firmly hold on to within her consciousness is only the process to which her inner life was subjected while she was absorbed in symbols. The inner being of the human begins to know and behold itself without relationship to content from the senses. Danger. Because of the lack of true self-possession, she may feel she has arrived at the right result, and may feel the after effects of the symbolic inner picture. The inner experience gradually becomes filled with a content that enters the mind from without, in a manner similar to the way a content enters the senses from the outer world, except that in the filling of the mind with supersensible content consists in an actual living with the content. The etheric body exists between the astral and physical body. Another experience the spiritual researcher can have. After beholding the self, she can, via the energetic power of will, suppress this experience. After the suppression, the self may be confronted with a void. In such a case, exercises must be continued. Through intuitive knowledge, the whole relationship in which the human as soul finds herself with respect to bodily organization is altered, for the direct observation of the inner being of the soul. The etheric body is experienced as the primary entity, and the physical body its copy, something secondary. As a result of the freeing of the self from bodily organization, spiritual researcher experiences the act of recollecting differently. At first, she senses the attraction toward a particular experience, which is to be remembered, like the drawing of attention in a certain direction. The mind of the spiritual researcher is not ecstatic. The condition of mind of the spiritual researcher, the illusion of ordinary consciousness, is overcome, and which gains a starting power in the life of the soul, from which it actually experiences the human core of being in free release from the bodily organization. Thinking as touching with the soul. In the supersensible memory tableau, what confronts a person is what has proceeded from herself. For instance, a beloved. With the tableau, one will become aware of how one longed for such a person and took actions that one was inevitably led to that being whom she recognized as being in harmony with herself. Such requires looking upon one's inner being in utter freedom from preconceptions, even if this being meets the searching eye with reproach. This cognition is imaginative knowledge. Beyond this stage, confronted with forces which have really formed us as humans, forces of spirit and soul, even the memory tableau can be eliminated. The truly empty consciousness, a super stillness, what is experienced by one who blots out one's own soul content, one who senses, who contemplates the first stage of the supersensible within herself is in a certain state of well-being, until one excludes one's inner self. Then one experiences intense pain. But if we pass into this stage in full consciousness, there begins to enter, in place of imagination, inspiration, the experience of a real spiritual world. After one has eliminated the world of the senses and established an empty consciousness, accompanied by the inexpressible pain of the soul, then the outer spiritual world begins to meet us. The first thing we behold in this spiritual world is our own pre-earthly existence. A cosmic memory dawns for us. We peer into our pre-earthly experiences, beholding what we were as spirit-soul beings in a purely spiritual world, when we as spiritual beings participated in the molding of our own bodies. We sense ourselves as truly human when we no longer permit our feelings to be completely absorbed within the earthly life. Our feelings are shot through with inner light. We know that we have now developed our feeling into a sense organ for the spiritual. We must also make our will element into an organ of knowledge for the spiritual. Love must begin to play a role in human knowledge, a higher love than its significance for human life. Higher love, when one, with discretion for every step, perceives the world in a certain other consciousness. It's a practice of visualizing the events of one's day or life in converse, reverse order. Also pertinent is a melody, in reverse succession of tones. The more we pass through such inner experiences of the soul, we discover the inner experience as freed from external course of nature, and we become more self-directing. We also learn to give attention to external life in more complete consciousness. The more powerfully we develop through practice this fully conscious absorption in another being, the higher becomes the degree of our own selflessness, and the greater our love must become in compensation. Ultimately, we reach the stage where, to imagination and inspiration which we have already developed, we can now add the true intuitive ascending into another being. We arrive at intuition such that, in complete individualism yet selflessly, we learn to experience the other being. The querent receives courage to meet the serious life events which await her, and directs her inner forces. These can exist only if she can feel and will herself in full consciousness, in her innermost being, including practically knowing herself. This is possible when she knows that her being derives from spirit, when she practically learns of her spirit nature and can find satisfaction only in the spirit. Her highest powers and courage can come to her out of the supersensible, out of the spirit. In ordinary knowledge, we feel ourselves to be the subject, and we seek the objects that are around us. In initiation knowledge, we slip out of ourselves and become the object which seeks for its subject. In ordinary knowledge, we think about things. In initiation knowledge, we must discover how our being is thought in the cosmos. Meditation is connected with an act that one can only perform for oneself. Make an inner resolve and hold to it. Meditation is the only completely free act in human life. If we make an inner promise, not to another, but to ourselves, to remain steadfast in our resolve, to meditate, then this in itself will become a mighty force in the soul. The sub or unconscious realms are colored from all kinds of remains, from our past life of perception and feeling, and is apt to influence us. Why we should not deploy subconscious or unconscious material for meditation. Meditation on some words, contemplation with the soul, repose in them. Our time of repose will become successively longer with practice. Next stage, gather the whole human life of soul to concentrate all forces of thinking and perception within us upon the content of the meditation. The forces of the soul are strengthened when directed to the same content. The forces of the soul must be invigorated and strengthened before real investigation in the supersensible world may be undertaken. One great day, one observes an activity of the soul entirely independent of the body. One realizes one is now involved in an activity of the soul and spirit, which is absolutely free from any bodily influence. Gradually, one notices that one can make something vibrate in the head. When one is awake, one vibrates in the whole organism, except for the head. When we dream, we become aware of the last movements of the etheric body. The first thing initiatory knowledge confers is the view of one's own life of the soul, not woven from ideas. It is something creative. We see this inwardly active principle in the organism of the human as the etheric body. It is not spatial, but a time body. We have a physical space body and etheric time body, which is always in motion. This etheric body appears to us as a continuous tableau of events stretching back to birth. Such processes have the effect of completely changing the mood of the soul. The more she presses forward in her quest to glean supersensible knowledge, the more she feels influences from her own corporeality waning. Spiritual development shows itself via memory. What we experience in the supersensible world requires a new mode of memory. What we experience in the supersensible world impresses itself in memory only if one can first, with all effort, bring what one sees in the supersensible world into concepts, if one can transfer one's understanding to the supersensible world. What I have related concerns the ability to bring form into the etheric body in the head, making it possible for one to see the time body. The consciousness expands into the wide spaces of the ether. One no longer contemplates a plant without plugging into its growing. The slightest trait perceived in other humans will lead one into the whole life of the soul. A true philosopher should be practical. Knowledge of how to make coats is more important than logic. One must not be a dreamer or fanatic. One must come out of oneself without losing oneself. How to carry supersensible knowledge further. Cultivation of meditation. Firstly, one rests with the meditation upon certain definite ideas, or a combination of ideas, thereby strengthening one's life of soul. One must also be able to, at will, drive those ideas out of consciousness again. After long practice, we shall be able to throw the whole retrospective tableau of life back to birth. If we eliminate it, a more wakeful consciousness will arise in us. This is inspiration, the in-streaming of that which is the reverse of substance, free from ether. If I have eliminated the etheric body, I enter into what is the reverse of ether, spirit. We experience what was with our soul prior to birth or conception, and behold ourselves as thus, beholding the eternal directly. Eternity has two aspects, immortality and unbornness. We reach further to the supersensible world if we try to make our activity of the soul and spirit still freer of the support of the body. Such involves gradually guiding the exercises in meditation and concentration to become exercises of the will. One way to exercise our forces of spirit and soul is to get free of the outer causes of things. A good exercise for such and for the will is to think about the day's experiences in converse order. Gradually, we are able to let a retrospective tableau of the experiences of the day pass before our soul in pictures. If we are in the position to free ourselves completely from the kind of thought which follows three-dimensional reality, we will see what a tremendous power our will becomes, freeing it from its bondage to events in material world. Gradually, we bring our will to a point when our spirit is submerged in other spiritual beings outside us. True spiritual knowledge is submerging in spiritual beings when our body no longer disturbs us. We can submerge ourselves into the spirituality of things, plunging into the colors of things. We can submerge ourselves into the process whereby the chicory blossom becomes blue. When one abides in the spiritual world, one becomes aware that the moral world order possesses a higher reality than the physical. The physical and moral world, being and becoming, become one. We experience that the world has moral laws as objective laws. One cannot reach intuitive knowledge without passing through intense suffering, but now pain becomes a cosmic experiencing of all suffering. Suffering must exist if the world is to arise in its beauty. All beauty is grounded in suffering. Beauty can only be developed from pain. We find our way into the supersensible world by going through pain. Only through pain and suffering does one acquire knowledge. We must seek the active spirit in the world to perceive the spirit in the world. Basis for occult development, cultivation of absolutely clear thinking, ridding oneself of the will-o'-the-wisp of thought. One must become master in one's world of thought. One must place a thought at the center of one's soul. Thinking is then impelled to act out of its own energy. For a period of time, the pupil starts from this thought and associates with it everything that is pertinent to it. At the end of a period, at least a month, the thought should stand before the soul just as colorfully and vividly as at the beginning. One notices from this a feeling of security and firmness in the soul from paying subtler attention to one's soul. One concludes the exercise by focusing thinking upon the head and the middle of the spine, as if one were pouring that feeling of security into this part of the body. Next exercise. One takes up an action one would otherwise not perform every day for a month. This stirs the initiative of action in the soul. In the third month, new exercise. Cultivation of equanimity towards fluctuations of joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain. Care is taken that no pleasure will carry us away, no sorrow plunge us to the depths, no experience leading us to anger or vexation that is immoderate, no expectation give rise to anxiety or fear, no situation disconcert us, and so on. The moods to which this exercise is applied are replaced by purer qualities of the soul. One day one will discover inner tranquility in the body. Fourth month, one takes up a positive attitude towards life. This consists in always seeking for the good, the praiseworthy and beautiful in all things and experiences. Soon she notices a hidden beauty in all things. Such an attitude will strive to help what is imperfect rather than simply find fault and criticize. She who turns her attention for a month to the positive aspect of all experience will feel an experience as though her soul was opening to secret and subtle processes in her environment. One grows out of and beyond oneself. One learns to regard a part of one's environment as something that belongs to oneself. In the fifth month, the pupil should seek to cultivate in oneself the feeling of confronting every new experience with impartiality. In the sixth month, one should try to repeat all 5 exercises. One will notice that previous dissatisfactions with phenomena and beings disappear. A mood reconciling all experiences takes hold in the soul. If only the pupil has honestly strived inward, not to lose sight of the rules Such will be sufficient. Such honesty must foremost be honesty before oneself. Many are deceived in this manner, corrupted with egotism and cunning self-seeking. Rules. 1. No unproven concept shall enter my consciousness. 2. There shall stand before my soul the living obligation continually to increase the number of my concepts. 3. Knowledge will come to me only about such things, the yes or no of which I regard without sympathy or antipathy. Even secret wishes must be discarded. 4. I must overcome my aversion to the so-called abstract. One must attempt to acquire sense-free concepts. If you develop sufficient willpower, a willpower that shuts out entirely all observation of the physical body, so you can, in spite of seeing into space, completely suggest away physical space. Then you see space not empty but filled by a kind of archetype. This archetype has practically the same form as the physical body. It is not of the same nature, but it is organized, interlaced by fine veins and streams, but also has organs. This etheric body produces the human's essential life. Its color is between a violet and reddish tinge. This is the second body. The third body is the aura. Joyful, self-sacrificing feelings express themselves in this aura in luminous streams of color. Feelings of hate, physical feelings, express themselves in dark color tones. Sharp logical thoughts express themselves in sharply outlined forms. Illogical, confused thoughts come to expression in figures with blurred outlines. Meditation as inner immersion is the first stage which a student of initiation must undergo. Meditation means surrendering oneself to thoughts which possess eternal worth in order to raise oneself up in a conscious way to what lies above both space and time. We are filled with a new life when one daily draws into one's soul an eternal truth that draws from the great initiates. When one scrupulously meditates and practices certain virtues, certain achievements of the soul, then within this aura her sense organs of the soul develop. We call these sense organs lotus flowers. 2-petaled lotus above the root of the nose between the eye, 16 petals near the larynx, 12 near the heart, 10 in the pit of the stomach, and there are also 6 and 4-petaled lotuses. The eightfold path involves right resolve, right thinking, right speech, and right action, right living, right striving, right memory, right self-immersion, or meditation. Today, 8 petals of the larynx lotus needs to be developed by the initiate, and will be developed if one treads the eightfold path consciously. Today, the 12-petaled lotus still requires development of 6 of its petals. These are 6 virtues: control of thought, control of action, tolerance, steadfastness, impartiality, and equilibrium or composure. When one, via meditation and practices of the soul, has come so far that the astral body has begun to self-organize, then the work extends to the etheric body, and the etheric body receives the inner word, the inner meaning of things. The inner sounding, not a physical sound, is an experience one has when she becomes able to influence her etheric body from her astral body. She becomes homeless, no longer at home in the physical world. The spiritual world sounds within her. She overcomes the illusion of the personal self. Goethe says, "All that is transitory is but a likeness." What we see is only a picture of an eternal being. When we have surrendered our separate being, then we have overcome our outer separate life, and we have become part of universal life. Buddhi arises in her when she enters into universal life. Then all doubts and reservations fall away from her soul. She lives in tune in the world of things. Her own words become an echo of what stems from another world. In the next stage, she gains influence over what is done directly by her physical body. Through her actions, she wins influence over her karma, and she may utter the name of things. In the present age, the human can only utter one name, I. In the third stage of initiation, the querent gives all things names, which she received via intuition. This means that she has passed into the world I. She may call everything by its profoundest name, while modern humans can only say I to themselves. Having reached this stage, the initiate is thus called a swan, for she is the messenger of all things. What lies beyond these three stages demands knowledge of a special secret taught by the mystery schools. As Paracelsus says, the individual beings we meet in the outer world are the single letters, and the word that is formed from them is humanity. The special script is imbued with the great law of the spiritual world. The script is born out of the spiritual law of nature. The one who becomes versed in this script is in possession of this natural law. All her conceptions of soul and astral space itself thus become regulated by law. What she conceives is conceived in the sense of the great signs of this script. She is capable of this when she has renounced herself. She unites herself with primal, everlasting law. On the Rosicrucian path requires disciplined thinking to move freely in the higher worlds, and requires imagination. To prepare for such, pupil gradually learns to immerse herself in pictorial concepts that represent the higher worlds. One only becomes independent of the physical world when one learns to consider the objects around her as symbols. She must thereby seek to acquire a moral relationship to them, i.e., in the violet one can behold a symbol for a calm, innocent disposition, going around from object to object, discerning them as symbols for the spiritual. In such a way one renders one's imaginative capacities fluid, releasing them from the sharp contours of sense perception. One comes to behold the symbol for a characteristic quality in every species of animal. Language is nothing but speaking in symbols. The pupil raises herself to imagination when she finds symbols in language, if the world is viewed a likeness to the human. Certain effects will become apparent. As she observes a flower, something loosens from the flower. The color of the flower that previously clung to its surface ascends like a small flame, hovering freely in space. Imaginative cognition forms itself out of these things. The surfaces of all objects loosen, and the world of light detaches from physical reality. When a color picture detaches itself, it encloses a being, now appearing in the color as a spiritual being. Detached colors clothe spiritual beings from astral space. The pupil can lose her bearings in two ways. Firstly, the initiate must undergo the experience of encountering the mirror image of her own soul, and it shows itself as strange, hideous, or beautiful shapes, images peeled off of physical objects. These images impart the pupil's own passions, desires, latent evil in the soul, appearing before her in the mirror of astral space. Everything is reversed in astral space. Everything appears as a mirror image. Often desires or lust appears in alluring forms, whereas a good characteristic may not appear alluring. Vices are clothed with beauty, virtues modestly displayed. Often a teacher can help to inform the student that what she perceives is subjective. Even if the pupil is in a position to perceive things objectively, there is also the possibility of her inner will directing and influencing these phenomena as an outer force. She must bring herself to the point where she can see through this and understand the strong influence that the wish has on the astral plane. In astral space, pictures of your own wishes deceive you. The Rosicrucian training also requires one to learn the occult script, an occult sign language, pictures formed by simple lines or joining of colors. Some processes in the higher worlds also operate in the physical. For instance, a whirling of a vortex can be presented as one vortex whirling into another. This is a figure to be found on the astral plane in all possible forms. When one understands this figure, one gleans how one race transforms into another. Also the pentagram. It is a sign of the fivefold human organization. Secrecy in that which underlies the species soul of the rose. When you connect the petals of the rose's image, you get a pentagram. Signs in the occult script signify various things. One must learn to order them appropriately. The Rosicrucian path also requires bringing rhythm and repetition into one's life, rending order from chaos. A good rhythm is established by undertaking occult exercises every day at a definite time, always the same hour. Also breathing practices. Also demanded is that the pupil learn the correspondence between micro and macrocosm. One finds the entire spiritual organization of the macrocosm spiritually within one's own organs. The sixth step is contemplation. It gives the pupil cosmic knowledge and expands her self-knowledge beyond the personality. One finds the self when one looks without. One must learn to perceive the self in that which lies outside one. Looking within just creates a higher egotism. Self-knowledge may only be practiced when the pupil of the white path has bound herself to self-renunciation, when she has learned to say to each thing, "That am I." She is ripe for self-knowledge. To know oneself, she beholds oneself in the mirror of the outer world. When she knows the whole world is her body, she speaks to the flower as a member of her own body. Gradually, the querent experiences what is called godliness on the Rosicrucian path, representing the element of feeling that leads one to higher worlds. She is not only to think about higher worlds, but also to feel in them. Thereby the fruits of her striving will be revealed to her, and she will become a true helper of humanity. The first heralds of her entrance into higher worlds is when her sleep life is animated by significant dreams. Gradually, she leads her experiences into her ordinary consciousness. She then perceives astral beings in her entire environment. This is the process of imagination. There are 3 stages. In the first stage, she perceives the beings which stand behind every physical impression. She becomes day clairvoyant. With practice and steeping herself in the occult script, she becomes day clairvoyant. On the 3rd level, she becomes acquainted with all the things in the astral world, which lead the human to evil, but which are actually intended to lead upwards. 3 further stages. 1. She attains knowledge of the conditions of life between death and new life. Next, the ability to see how forms transmute into another. Finally, she beholds the metamorphosis of the conditions of life. Imaginative knowledge and artistic imagination. Imagination. Behind every animal and plant, something lies for the pupil. Something should arise. In the meadow saffron, calm, piety. In the sunflower, a strong, vigorous life of ambition and self-reliance. When one sees in this state, one raises oneself to imaginative knowledge. She then sees something like a cold flame ascend from a plant, a color picture that leads her to the astral realm. Thus the pupil is guided to see things which present to her spiritual beings from other worlds. The teacher tells the student who wishes to follow the Rosicrucian path, strive not to love merely a single animal nor form. Particular relationships with single animals. Seek to have a living feeling for whole animal groups. Then you will receive through this an idea of what the group soul is. All the sensations of the single organs pass to the soul. This is also the case with a group of animals. The human can raise herself to a comprehension of the group soul if she is able to fashion a form that contains all individual lions, for instance, just as a general concept contains the individual images belonging to it. Then the flowers, for instance, become for her an actual manifestation of the spirit of the earth. When she immerses herself in the mood of the plant world, she observes the flame forms that ascend from the plant. There also exists an experience of the mineral dimension. The mineral craves nothing, is chaste and pure. One only understands the human when one can recognize the connections between the human being and the forces of nature. When spiritual life comes to expression in external forms, we shall have a style that expresses this spiritual life. What lives in spiritual science must stamp itself later in external forms. Then we must look on the mission of spiritual science as a cultural mission.